everybody, welcome to my Pete and Pole Air Camper / RV7 YouTube video channel. Thanks for stopping by, I appreciate it. If you've been here before and you've looked at some of the other videos, you've probably noticed the long, boring introduction at the beginning of each one. I am redoing that now. I just want to cut it down, keep it nice and short and sweet and to the point. So again, welcome. One thing I also wanted to make note of is I'm going to include some contact information for those who have questions and would potentially like some help with their project. Haters, don't waste your time. I am Johnny on the spot with the delete button, and I will delete your email post haste and not even read it, so don't waste my time, don't waste yours. Anybody else looking for some help, advice, have questions, concerns, whatever, you'll now be able to contact me directly. I'm quite regular on email, so I should be able to get a response to you relatively quick. I've got a ton of photographs for both aircraft, so if you need some clarification on something, chances are I've got detailed photographs and I'll be able to help you out. Let's see, other than that, I think that's it. I'm going to keep this short. Again, if you like what you see and you want to help me out to get through my RV7 build project, you can visit my GoFundMe. Just do a search for Caretaker Arrow. That's Caretaker with a K. I also have an Amazon wish list. There's some pieces, parts in there that I could use. Again, if you feel moved enough to help me out, it'd be greatly appreciated. Or if you want to just contact me directly, you know, we can talk about whatever, and so I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, thanks for coming by, I appreciate it, and again, hopefully you'll find these videos worth your time, and that's that. So let's get back to building, and I am now going to shut up, and I'll talk to you later. Hey everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about tube flaring and the tool that I use to flare the tubing on my RV7. This is a Imperial, I don't know if I can get this to show up, it's called a roll air flaring tool. I don't know if that's going to show up, but it says here roll air flaring tool. It's made by Imperial Eastman. There's different companies that make these, but they pretty much all look the same. This particular tool is a 37-degree flaring tool, which is the flared dimension, if you will, on the various AN fittings that the airplane requires. So whatever you flare with this tool, it will fit the AN flare on the fittings. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what this is, and then I'll do a demo of actually flaring a piece of tubing. Again, I don't know how well this is going to show up, but here are your blocks for the different size tubing, and the blocks are numbered. So this is a number 5, this hole here is an 8, and this big one here is a 10, and they're also marked on the other side. So this hole here is a 6, this hole here is a 4, again this is an 8. So that corresponds with the tubing. So if you're doing a 1/4 inch piece of tubing, that's considered a number 4 tube, because I believe it's 1/16. So 4/16 is a 1/4 inch. So this would be your 1/4 inch hole here. Here's your number 4 for this hole. But you can tell by looking at them, you know, roughly which hole size you need for your piece of tubing. This swivels out of the way, so you can move these blocks around. You can slide the blocks to get your tubing in and out of here. This is mostly used for, you have your tubing that comes up through here, and you flare it. Once you flare it, you can't bring it back down out of the tube or out of the holder, so you would just move this out of the way, separate the block, and you can pull your tube with the flare and the nut right out of it if you had to. So that's basically what this is. This is nothing more than a clamp. You put your tube in the appropriate size hole, and then you tighten this down to basically hold your tubing. This is the actual flaring head. This I'll show you when I do the actual demo for the flaring the tubing. But this gets held in a vise. And this block slides in here. This is what actually does the flaring. There are rollers in here. There are 3 individual rollers. You make sure that those stay lubricated and that they roll. I believe they're supposed to turn. I can't tell if they're actually turning or if I'm just sliding on them. But this whole thing turns, and you've got this gauge here. And I know this is not going to show up on video. I'll have to take a photograph of it. But this gauge piece here, the piece that I'm moving back and forth, there's a block here. There's a block here, and there's a block here which is not as tall. What happens is when you look on here, there are numbers. This says 8, this says 10, this says 3, 4, 5, and 6. So going back to this block here, if we're doing 1/4 inch tubing, here's our number 4. This is our number 4 hole. This is where we would put our 1/4 inch tubing. So our 1/4 inch tubing is in block 4. So then you would come to this. You see that this side here has the number 4 on it. This has 8 to 10. This has 3, 4, 5, 6. So this has number 4. So you would move this block over underneath this nut assembly, and then you would spin it down until it stops. That sets the depth of the flare. So now this nut is hitting on that block. Then you move the block out of the way, and then you go ahead and spin this down till it stops. And that in effect drives this down into the tubing and creates the flare. And I'll demonstrate that. What I want to point out is the fact that there's this gauge here. Let me back this out. So you put your gauge, depending on the size tubing that you're using, you would either set if this block here is for tubing size 3, 4, 5, and 6. You'd move it over, set your depth. If you're doing larger tubing that requires block 8 or 10, you'd use this gauge. So you'd open this up, slide this over, set it down until it hits that block and stops, and then move the block out of the way, and then go ahead and drive down your flare. The other thing that I want to make note of is that this nut is spring loaded, and you can see there's a pin and a cutout for the pin. Just like that. So what happens is you have the pin engaged, and when you turn the nut, it drives down this entire screw assembly to give you your flare. So it turns the flaring mechanism here, and it drives it down at the same time like a screw. So once you do that, you set your block, you have your depth set, you move the block out of the way, and then you do your flare. Once you get down to the bottom of your flare, so that's all the way down. So now your flare is complete, but to make it nice and round, to make it nice and concentric, you pull this out of that pin and then rotate it. So now it's going to ride up on this lip here. That pin is going to ride on this flat. And now you are spinning the cone, but you're not driving it up and down. You're just spinning it. And you can go ahead and spin that around multiple times to give your flare a nice round concentric completion. And I'll go over all of that here in a minute, but that's basically how the tool works. These are the only two parts to the tool. So let me get a piece of tubing, and I'll go over how to prepare the tube, how to set this up in the vise, how to gauge it, and clamp your tubing and all of that. Alright, here's a scrap piece of fuel line tubing. This is the very soft aluminum 1/4 inch fuel line that goes inside the fuel tank for the RV7. What I use is a simple, what I want to call it, a tubing cutter. I don't hacksaw. If I can help it, I'll use a tubing cutter. And I may do a video on using a tubing cutter at a later time. But this was cut with a tubing cutter. And you can see that the ends are kind of raw. I don't even know if this is in focus. So the ends need to be cleaned up. And I just take a file and I'll file the end to clean it up. And then I'll use either a countersink or a specific internal deburring tool that I have for tubing, and deburr the inside of the hole. I'll file the end nice and flat, and then I'll clean up the outer edge with a file, and then I'll clean out the inner hole with, like I said, either a countersink or I've got an inside hole deburring tool that I could use as well. So let me do that, and then I'll show you what this looks like once it's cleaned up. Okay, so here's the tube ready to be flared. I've cleaned off the end. It's nice and square. It's deburred. The inside of the hole is deburred. And now I can go ahead and set up my flaring tool in a vise and get this tube flared. So I'll do that next. One thing that I wanted to note, again, the end of this has to be cut square and finished off square. If this tubing is cut at an angle, your flare is going to have a weird shape to it. So just make sure that this end is square and clean. You don't want any burrs on it, because when you do the flare itself will crack. Alright, let me get this set up. Alright, so here we go with tube flaring. Another thing I want to talk about is the nut and the ferrule. So this is called the ferrule. This is obviously the nut. When this is flared, the ferrule, of course, will mate with the flare. You can see that I don't know if you can see that, but it's on the inside of this. It's got the same 37-degree angle cut into it that matches the 37-degree angle of the flare. So the tube is flared, this goes up to the flare, and then the nut then will draw, as you screw the nut onto the fitting, it draws the sleeve up to that flare and basically sandwiches the flare between the fitting and the ferrule. That's basically how those work. Now with this particular piece of tube, there's nothing on this end, there's no tight bends. So I can do the flare of the tubing first and then put my nut and ferrule on. But if there was some kind of hard 90-degree angle on this, you might be able to slide the nut. Let go of the ferrule. Come on now. If this was a 90-degree bend, you might, I doubt it, but you might be able to get the nut through that bend and get the nut on and off, but you would never get the ferrule to make that bend. So if there's any kind of tight bend, or if there's some kind of fitting or something on the other end, you have to absolutely make sure that you have your nut and your ferrule on the tubing before you do your flare. Okay? So now, let me get this set up. So like I said, this just goes in the vise. You want to secure it, you don't have to kill it. And then your block will slide in here. Get your cone, unscrew the cone to raise it up out of the way. So now your block slides. I believe I'm not sure what size nut this is. Let me get a wrench for that. Stand by. I believe it is 3/4, but I'm not sure. And it is. So this nut here is 3/4, and this nut here is also 3/4. Okay. So now I've got my nut and my ferrule on the tube. This is the clean end. This is the end that I just filed and deburred. So I'm going to find the appropriate hole, which is this one here. I've got this loose. I'll move my blocks out of the way. And I'm just going to put my tubing up in here temporarily for the moment, just to kind of hold it in place. Like that. Now, I guess that was stupid. I can't put the nut and the ferrule on that tubing because there's nothing holding, there's nothing preventing them from sliding off, so I'll just set those aside. Okay, so now I'm doing 1/4-inch tube. So on my gauge here, this side of the gauge has the 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the block that I have to use. So I'll move this up, slide this over, bring this down till it stops on the block, on the gauge, just like that. Move out. Actually, I'm going to leave this on here for now. So I'll bring this down onto the gauge, and I'll leave it there. Okay, so now I can loosen this, bring my tubing down, slide this whole assembly under the cone, and then I push the tubing up onto the cone like that. I'm hoping that comes out on the video. Let me see if you can see it. Yeah, you can see that. So now the tubing goes up until it touches the cone. I hold it there and tighten the tubing in place. I'll put a wrench on here. Now this is 1/4-inch, very super soft aluminum, so I don't have to kill it to clamp it. So now the tubing is up against the cone and it's held tight with the block. Now I can pull my gauge out of the way, just like that, and now I can go ahead and spin this, and it will rotate and drive down into the tubing to create the flare. I hope the camera's out of the way enough that I can do this without knocking it off. So now you can see this is rotating and it's driving down and it's creating a flare on the tube. And I'll continue to rotate this till it stops. And right there it just stopped. Now at this point I can pull this up and I can continue to rotate the cone without driving it down to give that flare a nice round finish. So I'll pull this up and I'll continue to turn it. And this you can do this to your heart's content, however many times you want to go around. There's no set number that I'm aware of. So I just go around a few times to make sure that that flare is nice and circular. Okay, and then I just happen to, so now you want to come around and get that pin locked back into its recess like that. Now I can unscrew this and bring this cone up out of the way, just like that. And I can loosen the clamp. And this is what I was talking about. See, now I can't get the tube out of here because it's flared. Of course, I could pull this block out of the way and bring it out this way. But if there was another fitting down here, or if this was a 90-degree bend, at this point you couldn't get the tube out. So that's where this mechanism comes into place, where you loosen it, move it out of the way. Now you can separate the block and you can pull right through. And there's the flare. Now what I like to do is I get my my magnifying glass out, or my glasses, and I'll inspect this flare to make sure that it's clean It's concentric. Most importantly, it's not cracked. You want to look for cracks around this edge. If you did your deburring correctly, once it's flared, if you deburred correctly and you get your gauge set up correctly and you don't over flare the tubing, there should be no cracks. But I'll get a rag and I'll come down in here and I'll clean this out and I'll clean this up a little bit. But I can tell just by feeling it there's no cracks on here. And then if you don't already have your ferrule and nut in place, you put on your ferrule. See how that mates with the flare. And then you introduce your nut. And that's it. That's a flared tube. If you don't have this set up correctly, and you over flare the tubing, like I said, it will crack. And sometimes in extreme cases, especially with hard tubing, I've flared a lot of stainless, both with this type of manual flaring tool, and I've also used some powered flaring tools which are outstanding for stainless. But if you over flare the tube, a lot of times it will get so big in diameter that you won't be able to get the nut on. But with this tool, that's pretty hard to do. So that's it. That's a finished flare. So this would be able to go right onto a fitting at this point, and you'd be finished. All right, so that's it. That's a little OJT, if you will, on using this particular type of flaring tool, and we'll move on to some more fuel tank work. Hello again, everybody, and as usual, thanks for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it worthy, and again, as always, hopefully you found something that was worth your time. So thanks again for stopping by, and again, making this short and sweet. I've got contact information available now, so if you feel the need to help me out with my RB7 project, feel free to email me. Or you can go to my GoFundMe, as I said in the beginning, just do a search for Caretaker Arrow. That's Caretaker with a K. And again, I've got the Amazon wish list. And for you RB7 guys and girls out there, if you watch these videos and are moved to purchase an RB kit of your own, if you'd include my build number with your first order, Vans will give me $100. It's kind of like a referral, I guess. So if you were to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. It's no money out of your pocket. It's just something Vans does as an incentive. So as I said, if you decide to build and you order your first kit, if you'd include my builder number, I'd appreciate it. And all this contact information will be in the description of each video. So check out the description and do what you feel you need to do, and I would appreciate any help. And again, if you need some further assistance, contact me. I've got photographs, I've got videos. We can communicate directly, and hopefully I can give you some further guidance if you want it. So that's it. Again, thanks for stopping by. Come back frequently. I try to do a video or two every week if I can. So subscribe, keep coming back, and I will talk to you again soon. All right, thanks.